A very warm welcome again to Conversations. Today we have with us Dr. Suman, the Director of Research at the ASER Center, a position that she has held since the organization was established in 2008. Annual Status of Education Report is an annual citizen-led survey that generates estimates of children's schooling and learning levels in rural India. Prior to joining ASER Center, she has worked as a software developer, a high school teacher, and a researcher as well. She has worked with government, non-government, and private organizations in the country, but has also collaborated with international organizations in the United States, Mexico, and Pakistan. She holds an undergraduate degree in economics with honors from the Delhi University and master's and doctoral degrees in education from Harvard University. The following talk will provide an overview of the rationale and architecture underpinning ASER as an organization and the survey that it conducts. It will also focus on the design of the upcoming ASER 2023 survey, which will be in the field later this year. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Dr. Suman to take this session forward.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prima, and thank you very much, Anu, for this invitation, and to Rushi for this kind introduction. I just want to echo Rushi's request for those of you who can to please let me see you, because, you know, this is billed as a conversation, and it is very, very difficult to be conversing with myself on my own laptop screen. So as Rushi mentioned, I will be talking about the annual status of education report, the ASER report, which is an annual survey of children's foundational reading and arithmetic. I do have a PPT to share, so let me just make sure I can do that. Is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Okay, great. So just to start, I'll give you a quick overview of what I want to talk about this evening. And I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about where the ASER survey comes from, because everybody knows ASER as an assessment of learning outcomes that produces data. But that's not where ASER started, and understanding where, you know, sort of the origin story of the ASER survey helps to understand how it's designed, why it's designed the way it is. So I think it's interesting to go back now more than 20 years to just give you a little glimpse of where this whole idea of the ASER survey came from. So that's where I'm going to begin. Then I'll spend a fair bit of time on the next bullet, which is about the survey design and architecture. And the reason for that, of course, is because all of you are a faculty of education. So I'm guessing that you're interested in methodology and design and so on. So I think quite a lot of my conversation will focus on the elements that go into, you know, the reasons the survey is designed the way it is, and then what are some of those design parameters that underlie the survey. I'll talk briefly about evolution of the methodology over time. So basically, we did the same thing for 10 years, from 2005 to 2016. And then there was a change. So I will talk a little bit about what that change has been and how it's reflected in the ASER survey that we do every year. And then finally, I will take you through very quickly a look at the last big national ASER survey, which was ASER 2022 last year, what the scale was, and just a couple of the major findings, just so that you have a sense of what that looked like. And then a little bit of an introduction to what we're planning to do this year. And in fact, that process kicks off 2 weeks from now. So this is just about to go into the field. And I hope I won't be talking for more than, let's say, 30, 40 minutes. And I hope that there will be occasion for lots of questions and, you know, actual interaction after that. So jumping right in then to the to where ASER began. And so ASER begins from the story of Pratham's work with communities across India. Now, Pratham has been around since the mid-1990s. And by the early 2000s was already working in a number of states, in, I would say, thousands of communities across India, in states as varied as, from Bihar to Maharashtra to Chhattisgarh, and a whole variety of contexts, with the objective of connecting children and therefore connecting families to schools and to learning. And so Pratham at the time was working with this objective of getting children into school, which was, of course, not only Pratham doing this at that time. There was already a big movement across the country towards universal primary education. So enrollment was already going up, and Pratham was part of this push to connect children, to get children into school, and also to make sure that they had some basic ability to do, simple reading and arithmetic tasks. So if we look back to the early 2000s, probably a key goal for Pratham teams working across the country was the idea of making sure that every child in early primary grades could read a simple story, a few lines of connected text, read it, understand it, discuss it, maybe criticize it, and develop a series of activities that would enable these Pratham teams to do that. Now, because Pratham was in many different kinds of contexts across the country, it needed to come up with a framework or a vocabulary for figuring out what children needed in different parts of the country. So even if the objective was common, what children might need in, let's say, a rural Bihar might look very different from what children might need in a rural Maharashtra. So the objective of coming up with a framework for use internally by Pratham teams was behind what the design of what came to be known as the ASER tool. Now, I don't know, I'm sure some of you have seen this before. I don't know how many of you have, but the tool that you see on the screen is today known as the ASER reading tool. But it came from this idea that people within Pratham needed to figure out what children they were working with could do. So what was their starting point? And then think about what activities they needed to implement to help children progress to the next level. So children who could read, let's say, letters, but not read simple words would have a certain set of activities like the photo that you see on the screen in front of you. There would be a lot of activities based on alphabets and, playing with letters of the alphabet to help children put alphabets together and come up with words. Similarly, for each of these stages, activities were associated with each of these different sort of levels of reading, which would enable Pratham teams to make sure that every child, whether they started at what we now call letter level or even less than letter level, or whether they were already at what now is known as standard 1 level text level, were given activities appropriate to the reading level that they were at that would enable them to progress quickly to the next level. And the objective, finally, was to make sure that every child could read a text like this standard 2-level text that is on the screen in front of you, obviously in the language in which they were working. So this is an English example, but teams were working in the language of the state that they were working in. So this is kind of the basis for where the Pratham reading tool came from. And this tool then over time became the basis for the ASER survey. And that process I will tell you about in the next few minutes. So as Pratham teams were using this tool to help children progress in their reading and their basic arithmetic abilities, what they began to do was to understand that they needed to engage parents and community members in this process. Because remember, we're talking about the early 2000s. This is pre-right to education. Many parents of young children had not themselves been to school. So what Pratham teams began to do was to go not even village to village, but hamlet to hamlet within a village, from door to door, going and finding children young children, using the tool that I just showed you with those young children in the presence of family, anybody else who happened to be around. And this generated lots of curiosity, lots of interest, lots of engagement, not just from the family, but from members of that hamlet or of that village who happened to be around when this process was going on. Youth might come by who had some level of education, and they would want to know, well, what are you doing here? And the Pratham team involved would explain what they were doing and try to encourage educated youth of that hamlet or of that village to participate. So it became a community activity and not an activity that was really being run by and for an external organization. So the idea of engaging with this process of reading and what is it that your children in your village or in your hamlet can do and can't do and why was fundamental to really engaging local people who may or may not have themselves been to school in what does it mean to think about learning, not just schooling, because children were going to school. But this learning business was still a bit of a mystery to many people who had not themselves been to school. So as these teams went around the village from hamlet to hamlet, it was possible to have discussions with community members, with family members, to think about what they were seeing, what their children were able to do, and to then, as they completed this process in an entire village, to aggregate the data that they were getting from individual children to generate an aggregate picture of the hamlet and then finally of the village. And then, of course, then think about, well, what can we do if we're finding that our children can't read or can't do basic arithmetic? What is it that we ourselves can do? And that's where often, the more educated youth of the village were asked to participate. Teachers were asked to participate. So thinking about what could be done, providing maybe before school classes, after school classes to help children acquire these skills that were basic to being able to make progress in school. And then, of course, talking to local government, to trying to figure out other kinds of institutional mechanisms to improve learning outcomes in that context. So this process, which was a process that was followed in hundreds of villages across the country by Pratham teams, then later became the seeds of what became the ASER survey. So the idea being that if this logic that you go to individuals, to families, to communities to generate evidence on the ground, to engage families and community members in thinking about what could be done about it, could this logic be used to try, to test a similar theory of change at a larger level of aggregation, whether that was district, state, or country. So this was sort of the basis for what became the ASER survey. So now jump forward a few years, but now we're in 2005. And this is not only in India, but all across the world, it was still assumed that schooling and learning were much the same thing. That is, that if you sent children to school, the learning would follow. Today, of course, many of us, all of us know that this is not the case, that schooling and learning are not the same thing. But back in 2005, the fact that going to school did not automatically imply learning was not well known. And so as I've just been describing, Pratham's own experience and learning prior to 2005 made this very clear that children were going to school, but they were not acquiring these basic skills. And the problem was something that was not seen either by teachers or by parents. Parents often, because they thought that they're sending their children to school, they're doing what they're supposed to do, and the learning would follow. And teachers, of course, because teachers were and still are expected to teach the curriculum, there was automatic promotion through primary grades. And so the assumption is that if children are coming and they're in class, then they are also learning what they're expected to be learning. So this process of enabling people to see the problem was critical to be able to figure out what the solutions might be to the problem. And then in 2004, as some of you might remember, I think probably many of you were not born at that point, but some of you may remember, the new government came to power, the UPA-1 government came to power. And there was talk of moving from outlays to thinking about outcomes. That is not just thinking about how much money we're spending on programs and on schemes, but also thinking about what are the outcomes of those expenditures. And also there was this new 2% education cess that was imposed to finance elementary education. So taxpayer money was going into primary education, and therefore Pratham felt that if our money is being spent for improving education, then it is every citizen's duty to know what their money is being spent on and understand a little bit about what the gaps and the needs are in this space. So whereas at the community level, at the family level, it was a question of really allowing people to experience the problem and see the problem. At aggregate level, the idea was to be able to provide data and indicators that could speak to the learning issue, because data was already available for enrollment, but not for learning outcomes. So that's where the ASER, the prequel to the ASER survey was. So now in 2005, as the survey began to be designed, some questions had to be answered about, how should it be designed? What should those design parameters look like? And this photo on your screen in front of you actually captures many of the key elements that the Pratham teams who were the people who were designing the survey thought were really important. One is that, it was non-threatening. As you can see, that little child in the middle is actually doing a reading assessment, but she, I think, is looking quite comfortable, relaxed, not scared. It is not a threatening test. There are many people around, there are people in the tree watching what is going on, so engaging with the process. So at this very not individual, but community level, there's a lot of engagement with what is going on. And later, this data is then aggregated for the village and then for across the country. But as the design of the ASER survey was being decided on, there was a series of factors that were thought about in order to take these decisions. So the first decision was about where the learning assessment should take place. Now, as all of you, I'm sure, are very well aware, mostly learning assessments, not just in India, but across the world, are done in school. So they're classroom-based, in-school assessments are done, whether they're done by teachers or by external organizations, they are usually in school. But it was very clear to Pratham, and this is true not only for India, but for many developing countries, that not all children are in school. Even if they're enrolled, attendance in many states is very poor. So even today, if you look at the case of Bihar or UP, for example, on any given day, you see 50% of enrolled children attending school. Then there are different kinds of schools. Children may be enrolled in unrecognized private schools, other kinds of schools. So if we really wanted to talk about learning for all children, we had to go and find all children. And the place to do that was in the household, not in schools. And that's why ASER is designed as a household survey. The second thing, as I was saying just a few minutes ago, Pratham could see very clearly that the basic learning outcomes were far below grade level for children, even for those children who were already enrolled in school. So therefore, the decision that rather than do what many learning assessments do, which is like exams, you do an exam for every subject in the curriculum. The decision here was to focus on some basic what we now call foundational skills of reading and arithmetic, and in some cases English, rather than to cover every subject in the curriculum. We were seeing very clearly that children were not, many children were not able to read. And so then the idea of giving children a pen paper test or an exam did not make any sense. See, if you give children a pen paper exam, and you get back a blank answer sheet, you won't know, looking at the answer sheet, whether you might think that this child doesn't know the subject matter being tested. It may not occur to you, if that child is in, let's say, standard 6 or 7 or 8, that the child couldn't read the question paper. So the only way to make sure that you understand whether children can read or not is to actually assess reading orally, one-on-one. And so that is how the ASER reading assessment is designed. This I've talked about a little bit already. Parents and family members also don't have a lot of experience of education themselves, although now 10 years, more than a decade after the Right to Education Act was introduced, this is not so much the case. But when ASER began, most parents of children in rural India had not been to school themselves or had very little education. And so having very simple tools and processes that many people could understand and engage with was a key part of the ASER design. And finally, this might be the most important one, or one of the most important factors going into the design of ASER, which is that according to us, education is not only the responsibility of governments or of schools or of teachers. Everybody, families, parents, need to engage with the question of learning to make sure that the change that we want to see does happen. So widespread engagement by ordinary people, not just by experts, but by ordinary people, we felt, and have felt from the beginning, was critical to provoke discussions and debates on the importance of learning and of ensuring foundational skills among children in the country. And so the ASER survey is designed to be conducted by a local organization or an institution in every rural district of the country. And every year, something like 30,000 people participate. So over the last 15 years, that's a lot of people who have had some exposure to this process in their own contexts. So just to summarize where this all then ended up in terms of the ASER architecture, we wanted it to be large because India is such a large and diverse country. It really didn't make sense to try to do it for, let's say, one state or even a handful of states. To really influence policy or discussion at a national level, it needed to be large. And because education plans and planning is done, allocations are done at the district level, the decision was made to keep the district as the unit of aggregation, not the state, but the district. As I've said, the survey is wide in terms of the number, the kinds and the numbers of what we call ordinary people who are engaged. We restrict the survey to foundational skills, reading and arithmetic, which are tested one-on-one with each child. One other key factor is that we wanted the whole process to be very quick. So the ASER survey every year rolls out in August. We're going to be beginning this year's survey 2 weeks from now, as I mentioned. The survey is in the field from September through November in different parts of the country. In December, the data is aggregated, analyzed, report is produced, and the report is is released every year in mid-January. So it is now pretty much like clockwork for since 2005. This has been the process followed in the survey. It's easy in terms of the testing, in terms of the process. So it's not something that requires a lot of expertise, a lot of, let's say, training in research methods or in survey administration. We do train, of course, everyone who administers the survey, but it doesn't require, let's say, advanced degrees or a high level of exposure to assessment and so on. And it's frugal in terms of the cost because we want to be able to maintain the implementation year on year. And to do that, we need to make sure that it costs as little as we can possibly make it. Okay, I've just seen, I thought there's, chat. No, okay. Yeah. So just to summarize all of the preceding discussion of, what were the factors that were taken into account while designing the survey, how was the architecture developed, this set of where, how, what, and who bullets on your screen now is the core of every basic ASER survey that we have done since 2005. It's a household survey of a representative sample of rural India. The sampling is done using the most recent census. So currently that's the census 2011, which is not recent at all, but it's the most recent one we have. 30 villages are selected randomly in each district, 20 households in each village. So that's a sample of 600 households per district. In each selected household, every child who is resident in that household in the age group of 3 to 16 is surveyed, and children in the age group of 5 to 16 are assessed for basic reading and arithmetic skills, and in some years also for basic English ability. The assessment is one-on-one with each sample child, and it is exactly the same assessment for every child, which is why we have multiple samples of the tool, so that if there are multiple children in the same household, each child gets a different sample, so there's no question of being able to copy or, overhear what your brother or sister did and say the same thing, respond the same way. And finally, as I mentioned, we have district partners in every district, and these are colleges, universities, NGOs. Diodes have been big partners for the last, I would say, 7 or 8 years. And last year's ASER 2022, something like 50%, a little bit more maybe, than 50% of our districts were, the survey was done by Diodes students. So that is the basic design of the ASER survey. And just a quick word about quality control, because this is always an issue when you talk about survey data. We go to great lengths to make sure that our data is accurate. And I'm not going to talk through each of these boxes on your screen, but just so that all of you know that, from the time that the survey rolls out with training of the volunteers, at first at the state level and then at the district level, we make sure to monitor their attendance, their understanding of the process in classroom sessions, their ability to actually carry out that process in the field. So they actually do a field day where they practice all of these processes. During the survey, there's monitoring on the phone. We have teams monitoring in the field. After the survey, we check the survey formats. There's a field recheck where we go back to a sample of households to make sure that our teams actually did go and do the survey. Data entry, checking. And if there are problems found at any of these levels, then there's a resurvey. There's a whole set of processes for either resurveying or dropping the households, or indeed, if need be, the entire village where problems were found. So that is just a very quick overview of a fairly complex process that starts from National Workshop, which rolls out in 2 weeks, and goes right through until the data is entered, which ends in December at some point. So that is what I've described so far is sort of what we call the basic ASER. And the blue boxes on your screen, the dark blue boxes, are the years where we conducted a basic ASER, which is all rural districts in the country, or pretty much all rural districts in the country, all children in the age group of 3 to 16, and basic reading and arithmetic. And in some years also basic English was assessed. So what happened after 10 years of doing this basic ASER, which is that 2005 to 2014 block, was there were a lot of internal discussions within Pratham and also with other stakeholders in government, in universities, other people who had been part of this journey. to think about whether we needed to keep going or whether 10 years was enough and we should just stop. So by 2014, many things had changed in India. There was a lot more awareness that schooling and learning were not the same thing. There was a lot more learning assessment going on, both nationally via the National Achievement Survey, as well as in states via the individual state level achievement surveys. But at the same time, we also saw that the problem had not gone away. So the figure that we have been citing since 2005, that 50% of children in standard 5 cannot read a standard 2 level text, still continued to be true in 2014. So although there was a lot more awareness of the issue, there was a lot more measurement going on of learning outcomes, we were not seeing a lot of change in terms of children's abilities to, children's acquisition of these foundational skills. So what we decided then was, after taking a gap year, which is 2015, was to switch to an alternate year model, where this basic ASER that I've been describing would be conducted every other year. So we did that in 2016 and 2018. And in the intervening years, we would focus on a different demographic and different age group and a different set of educational issues that were also important to highlight. So not losing focus of the problem of basic skills, but also trying to shine a spotlight in the alternate years on other kinds of issues within the education system. So in 2016, we did the basic ASER. Then in 2017, we did something called Beyond Basics, which I'll talk about more in a minute, because 2017 Beyond Basics is essentially what we are going back to this year in ASER 2023. So I'll say more about that in a little while. But basically, these alternate year ASERs were not across the country. They are smaller assessments, 1 to 2 districts per state, and a different age group. So the Beyond Basics age group was age 14 to 18. And in addition to the basic foundational reading and math skills, we were also looking at children's ability to apply those skills to everyday situations. We were also looking at their aspirations and a couple of other things that I'll come to in a minute. In 2018, then we went back and did the basic ASER again. And then in 2019, we did something that we call early years, which is basically exploring the fact that we were seeing year on year, the fact that children were falling behind in these foundational reading and arithmetic skills right from standard 1. So obviously the problem didn't begin once children entered school, but what we know of as school readiness, that is children's early and pre-numeracy and pre-literacy skills, needed also to be looked at to see whether children were getting the kinds of preschool exposure and skills, conceptual skills that they needed in order to be able to come into school at standard 1 and take on the standard 1 curriculum and build from there. At this point, we had done with Ambedkar University, Delhi, what is known as the India Early Childhood Education ECEI Impact study, which had shown very clearly that even in this pre-primary space, there was a real issue of quality of exposure of children getting these pre-literacy and pre-numeracy skills that are so important for children to acquire even before they join primary school. So ASER 2019, the early years survey, focused on age group 4 to 8, which is pre-primary and standard 1, 2, 3 of primary school. It looked at some of the school readiness indicators, and it also looked at social-emotional learning, among other things. So that was 2019. 2020 was supposed to be back to the basic ASER, but as you all know, that was the year that COVID came upon us. So in 2020 and 21, we were not able to do a field survey at all. But we did phone-based surveys using our 2018 data set, where we had telephone numbers for the households that we had gone to in that year. And of course, because it was a phone-based survey, we were not looking at learning outcomes in these surveys. We were looking at children's access to educational inputs, whether from school or from some other source. And we were also looking at learning support at home during these 2 years while schools were shut. Then 2022, of course, we went back to the basic ASER, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. And that brings us to this year's ASER 2023, which is coming soon. So that is sort of the new model of the ASER survey that started in 2016, where it's not, the basic ASER is not done every year, but in alternate years, we try to focus on a different set of, a different age group and set of questions. But there are elements that are common to every ASER, which is that it is a rural survey, it is a village sample drawn from the most recent census, and as you can see on the screen there, in each age group, in each household, all children in whatever age group we are surveying are included. So moving on then just very quickly to, let me see how I'm doing on time. Okay. This was our last basic ASER, that is the big All India ASER, which was conducted last year, ASER 2022. So the map of India shows you where ASER 2022 reached. And as you can see, it reached every state in the country. There are a few tiny white dots, which are union territories, Goa, Delhi, I think Daman and Diu, a few others. That's the scale of the ASER 2022 survey. Almost 7 lakh children, almost 30,000 volunteers, and so on. And, you know, people sometimes tell us that given the size of this country, the ASER sample is not big enough. So I thought I would just leave you with this idea that actually the ASER sample size is 3 times the size of the NSS sample, which, as you know, is the government conducted by the government of India and used for many key estimates used by whether of poverty and many other things that are generated by the government of India. And it's also bigger than, you know, the biggest similar survey in the US, which is the American Community Survey conducted by the US Census Bureau. So I just wanted to leave you with those 2 facts. And I'm just going to go over one key finding from the ASER 22 data. There's a lot more, and if anyone is interested in learning more, the report is available on our website. But this is one of the key findings that came out of 2022, which was the first big ASER after COVID-related school shutdowns for 2 years. And so this graph that you see in front of you is showing the proportion of children in standard 3 who can read at standard 2 level. That is, if you remember the tool that I showed you at the beginning, the story level, the highest level of reading in that tool, which is a, let's say, 4 sentences, connected sentences, story, what we call a story. You can see from this graph, and this is one great advantage of having done ASER for so many years, that you can look at trends over time. So this graph shows you trends in what standard 3 children have been able to do in terms of reading from 2012 to 2022. And you can see that between 2012 and 2018, reading and subtraction levels both were increasing very slightly, but they were increasing year on year from 2012, 14 to 16, and then to 18. And then there were the 2 years of COVID-related school shutdowns, and you can see that in 2022, there's a significant drop both in reading and in arithmetic, more in arithmetic than in reading. Now, you could say that the drop is not as big as one might have expected, given that schools were closed for 2 years. But either way, we can see that even from the 2018 levels that were quite low, 2022 levels do show a drop in what standard 3 children were able to do in terms of these foundational reading and arithmetic skills. The other really important point about the 2022 data comes from the current focus in India that derives from the new education policy, the national education policy, and now from Nipun Bharat, which has set a goal of having 100% children in grade 3 acquire foundational literacy and numeracy skills by 2027. So when we did this survey in 2022, there were already only 5 years left. You can see that only a quarter of children were at that level last year. If we are to go up to 100% within the next 5 years, this graph makes it very clear that if we do business as usual, we're not going to get there. Because although there was a slow increase in the previous decade, at that rate of increase, we're not going to be able to achieve this goal by 2027. And what this means is that some real rethinking needs to be done about how best to support children to be able to meet these new, the national education policy and the Nipun Bharat goals of ensuring that all children acquire these skills by the time their foundational stage of education is completed. And the last thing I want to say about the ASER 2022 findings, and this leads into the discussion of ASER 2023, is that the problem is not only with early grades and young children. So as you can see in that little table at the bottom of the screen, in 2018, half of all children in standard 5 could read at standard 2 level. That number has dropped to 42, almost 43 in 2022. Even in standard 8, these are children who are completing elementary school. In 2018, less than 3/4, just under 3/4 could read at standard 2 level. That number has also dropped further. So at the end of 2022, 30% of children completing elementary school were not able to read at grade 2 level. And in this push to focus on foundational literacy and numeracy for early grades, we wanted to make sure that these older children who also need help, also need support, are not forgotten. So that leads me to the rationale that was true. This was the rationale behind ASER 2017 Beyond Basics, and it is still the rationale behind ASER 2023 this year, which is that for the age group of 6 to 14, we have the Right to Education Act. We have Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan that really pushes the idea that every single child should be in school. And indeed, we have seen enrollment. All children are pretty much in school in this age group across the country. Then at 18, all of a sudden, these same young people are adult. They're able to vote, they're able to marry, they're able to work. But not very much was known, and this I'm talking about prior to 2017, about what happened beyond the stage of free and compulsory education from 6 to 14, and they're leaving school at age 18. So this is the age group 14 to 18 that we started referring to as the gap years. And that's really important, of course, because a very high proportion of our population is very young. And I'm sure all of you have heard many times this phrase demographic dividend. But if we do not ensure that these young people acquire the skills, the abilities, the exposure they need, then this demographic dividend may not be forthcoming in the future. So that was the rationale behind the ASER 2017 Beyond Basics survey. And just a few facts and figures about this age group. RTE has now been in effect for more than a decade, and we can see the effect. You can see that enrollments in Standard 8 have almost doubled in the years leading up to 2021-22, and this is the official government figures from TISS. 6 to 14 age group enrollment is almost universal. It's at 98.4%. though we do see a little bit of a drop off at the secondary school age group, that is age 15 to 16. It is 92.5% according to last year's ASER. So it is lower. It's still above 90%, but it is lower than at that elementary school level. More concerningly, although children are completing elementary school, as I was just showing you from the ASER results a moment ago, their basic learning outcomes remain a huge matter of concern. And again, this is not just data coming from ASER. The National Achievement Survey conducted by the Government of India shows much the same thing, although these results are not comparable. They also show that learning levels are not where they should be for these older children. This is a finding from the Beyond Basic Survey of 2017, where we looked not only at foundational reading and arithmetic, but also at these older children's ability to apply those skills to everyday situations. So this, as you can see, is a very, very simple question, asking children to calculate what is the final price of this t-shirt that costs 300 rupees and is being sold at a 10% discount. And not even 4 in 10 youth could answer this question, even though we only asked the question to children who could solve a subtraction problem that we had asked them to solve earlier. The other really disheartening fact coming out of that survey was that there is a huge gender gap, not only in this question, but in all of the questions, the questions that we asked in the Beyond Basics survey. And this is true for every single question. This is just one example. I don't want to take more time going through more examples, but again, this survey, the report is in the public domain. It is on our website, so please go and look at it if there's any interest in learning more about what young people could do in 2017. So basically what we are saying today is that although the National Education Policy and Nipun Bharat and our own ASER data from last year establish that foundational learning, literacy and numeracy for young children is an urgent priority, we cannot and we must not ignore older children and youth who also have urgent needs and need to be supported, need to be offered ways of acquiring these skills and these opportunities. And this same is also reflected in these 2 recent policy documents that have come out since our Beyond Basics survey of 2017. That's the National Education Policy, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, and the National Youth Policy of 2021, both of which talk about not only mastery of curriculum, but also greater flexibility, looking at 21st century skills, attention to aspirations, and so on. So just to wrap up, and this is my last slide, this leads me to what we're going to be doing this year. And as I said, that we are going back to the Beyond Basics age group of 14 to 18, knowing that the COVID pandemic had a profound impact, not only on the students, these children themselves, but on their families and on the institutions, and knowing that the policy context has also shifted somewhat during this period with the new education policy and the new national youth policy released. So what we will be doing is returning to the same 4 domains that we went to in 2017. Activity, that is, what are these young people doing? Are they in school, college? Are they taking vocational courses, and so on? What are they aspiring to do? How are they thinking about their future? What do they want to do? Who are their role models? Do they know what they need to do to get where they want to go? We have a block of questions on awareness. This has to do with financial awareness. Do they have bank accounts? Have they sent or received money, done any financial transactions, skills like that. And we have a new block on digital skills. We felt that this is very important this year because we can see that digital penetration has expanded enormously in this last few years. And especially during the COVID period when many students were relying on digital devices to access their schools and their colleges. So we wanted to get a sense of whether youth have access to these technologies and whether they know how to use them, and if they do, what they use smartphones for. And then the ability block, we are going back to the questions, many of the questions that we asked in 2017, which are both the foundational reading and arithmetic levels, as well as young people's ability to apply those skills to everyday tasks. And then the last new thing that we are going to be doing this year is, and this is a first for ASER because we've only, ASER has always been a survey, a quantitative survey of outcomes and other demographic information about students and their families. This year, we're doing a small-scale qualitative research exercise as well in parallel with groups of standard 10 and 12 students, just in a few schools in 3 states. And this is really to try to go into more depth to really sharpen and deepen our understanding of how these young people are thinking about their future. What are the influences on that thinking? What are the influences? What has their exposure been? And so on. So a very small scale exercise, but this is a first attempt to complement the large-scale ASER survey data with the small-scale qualitative insights coming from basically from FGDs with groups of students. And the results from this year's survey will be released, as always, in mid-January. So that's all I'm going to tell you for today, but maybe you will invite me or a colleague back after mid-January, where we can then talk about what we find in this year's survey. And so that is the end of my presentation. And I really hope that you have found this interesting and have some questions, and we can have a little bit of a conversation now around this. So thanks very much for listening, and back to Rushi or to Anu. I don't know who is going to coordinate.
Yeah, I'll take it over. Thank you so much for the presentation. We'll open the floor for questions. We'll follow a rule that, there are 2 options. You can post your questions in the chat. Even better, you can just unmute yourself, raise your hand first, and then I can point it towards you and then ask the question directly to Dr. Suman. So whoever wants to start can, we can have the round of questions now, and then we can go for a close. Is it okay if I start, and then we can start with, is there any questions in the classroom? I saw a bit of movement. Yeah, Purnima has raised her hand.
Hello, ma'am. Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Radhika, and I want to understand the survey conducted in 2022, which was online survey. So definitely there will be a lot of challenges that you faced. I want to understand what were these, and do you think it has impacted any way the quality of the results, and what were the steps taken for that?
Ruchi, do you want me to answer, or should we wait for a few, as you like? Should I answer?
As you're comfortable. So if you're comfortable with multiple questions, we can do that, or we can do Q&A one and then the next.
Sure. Just to clarify, Radhika, the question was about the ASER 2022 survey?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. In that case, I think you can take over the question now, and then we can do and take more later. Yeah.
So Radhika, thank you for the question. The ASER 2022 survey was pretty much back to business as usual. That is, by the time ASER went into the field last year, that was in around September. I'm guessing that when you said challenges and difficulties, you're referring to the actual rollout of the survey. Were you referring to COVID-related difficulties? Because by then, really, we did not face any. And that's one reason we did not do the field survey in 2020 and 21, because there were just too many challenges. It was not possible. So I'm not sure if I understood your question correctly. If you're talking about COVID-related challenges, then by 2022, ASER, we really did not face any. If that's not what you meant, then I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you to.
I mean, like you mentioned that you did phone surveys. It was not in person, so there would definitely be some differences than what we do in person. So I want to understand those aspects, if you can.
Right. Okay. So the phone survey was not in 2022. The 2022 survey was back to our usual field-based All India survey conducted in every rural district in the field. The phone surveys we did in 2020 and 2021, which were the years that we could not get into the field at all. And in those years, you're absolutely right. One challenge was because the data we were using was from 2018. One challenge was that you know how quickly people change phone numbers. So the numbers that we had from 2018 were in many cases no longer accessible in 2020 and 2021. So we did a lot of piloting prior to actually rolling out the survey to see how many attempts we needed to make to every phone number, how many phones we needed to call to make sure that we had a sample big enough to be able to generate meaningful estimates from that data. So it took months of piloting the phone piece just to make sure that we had enough responses from people to be able to get enough respondents to come up with those estimates. So that was one sort of issue. The other, of course, is that we were not able to do learning outcome survey at all because it's not possible to do an assessment on the phone. So we were asking families about children's access to school, whether the school was having any online classes, whether they were sending materials, whether children had any other source of support during the years that schools were closed, whether families themselves were able to support children's learning. And we found indeed that families really did step up and provide an incredible amount of support, whether it was siblings or educated uncles and aunts. There was a lot of engagement from families during that time to make sure that children did not completely lose the momentum of studying during the 2 years that schools were closed. So I hope that more or less answered your question, Radhika.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, then we have one more question.
I can see Bindu. Yeah, Bindu, please go ahead with your question.
Hello, ma'am, can you hear me? I'm Shreya and I'm in the School of Policy with TISS-Hyd. My question is related to also recent developments in the primary education scenario. So we have seen how rural incomes have decreased, schools closed down in the COVID era, and at the same time there was also the ASER survey also noted an increase in private tuitions. This was also in the national headlines. Do you think this is largely related to the quality of education, this trend, not just since COVID, but also the general trend of uptake of tuitions, especially for very young children? Is it largely related to quality or to aspirations, which perhaps more affluent families or households have? Thank you.
Thank you, Bindu, for that question. So one of the interesting things that, I didn't have time to share all of the interesting ASER 2022 results with you, but one of the things we did see in the data was a big shift from private to government schools in the 2022 data, very large shift. And very clearly that is a direct result of COVID, when many families were affected in terms of their, people lost their jobs, financially there was a lot of distress. And also many schools closed down, private schools, that is. Now, whether that trend has maintained now a year later, we don't know. But this is, you know, in, let's say, September, October, November 2022, that is something we saw. Now, in terms of this real desire for private tuitions, I think you're absolutely right. It is very much an aspirational thing. And what I mean by that is the assumption, I think, on the part of many people that if you pay for something, if it is a private input, it is of better quality. Now, we know from looking at ASER data over the years that it's not the case that children who go to private schools do better. Even at these basic tasks that ASER tests, they don't do better than government school children. If you control for household affluence, much of the difference between private school and government children go away. So a lot of that difference is coming from children's household backgrounds, not from differences in schools. But I think the assumption is that if you pay for a service, whether it is a private school or a private tutor, that is some sort of a guarantee of better quality. So that is one of the things that is, I think, absolutely driving this desire for private tuitions at a younger and younger age, because parents want a better life for their children. And they are trying to do everything they possibly can to make sure that children get there. Unfortunately, private tuition may or may not be the way, but that is certainly a trend that we are seeing in the data. Yes.
Can I make a follow-up question? Does this mean that there is a shift in the understanding of education as good in itself to something more instrumental, like a demographic dividend or you know, education for a better life, which it is. But if the focus is not on education as an entitlement, then we will see more of this division, this sort of gap between what people, most people can afford and what some people can access.
I think that, you know, if you go, all of us who have kids want our kids to have a better chance of the future, and we want them to acquire whatever exposure, skills, that they need to be able to get there. Now, how we individually interpret that need depends on who we are as people, our own backgrounds, and so on. So I think this difference between entitlement, you know, I think some of these differences are not very clear when you go to rural India. And I don't think maybe it matters in the sense of we want quality education for our children. Why we want it may differ, whether it's an entitlement or it's an instrumental reason. I'm not sure it really matters. It is, at least to me, I think that it is an expectation and an objective that we have, and how we get there is what matters.
Thank you so much.
Ma'am, we are having 4 questions now. Would you mind going through all 4 and then giving a collective response, or do you want to do it individually?
As you like, whatever works best for you.
We'll do 2 apiece to save, to find a midway. So one is from the chat, then I'll go to Bindu ma'am, and then followed up by Ritesh sir and Anu ma'am's question. So from the chat, I've got a question from Sanjay. Sanjay is asking, is ASER survey done only in villages? Is the survey done in towns, district headquarters, and cities also? Follow-up is, what is the distribution of sample size between villages and towns? That is from the chat that we have got. We can go over to Bindu ma'am for her question.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. My question was a little bit more detailed regarding the arithmetic of the basic survey. I'm just wondering, since this is administered one-on-one with students, if what is administered, I imagine, is more formal school arithmetic, you know, but would it be possible to administer something with more numerical thinking? Because so much of our research tells us that kids do arithmetic on their own, but where they have problems is with the formal school arithmetic. And I'm wondering if that, the tone of the basic, have you thought about changing it, especially for arithmetic, and what might be the issues? If you could perhaps use, resources to check them numerical thinking.
Ma'am, you can take these two and then post your response. We'll go to the two.
Sure. So Sanjay, thank you for that question. That's a really quick answer. No, ASER is only a rural survey. We have not done urban locations, whether towns or metros or anything else so far. We did try once in 2006, I believe it was. And we may go back to it someday in the future, but it is very much more complex for many reasons that, I don't think we have time to get into right now. But just two quick reasons. One is that, village in urban locations, the populations of interest are often the populations that are not part of any census frame. So slum areas, for example, if you have unauthorized slums, they will not be part of the frame from which you sample. So having a frame that does not include the populations that that are the most needy makes very little sense in terms of the results that we might be able to generate. Another is that urban regions are very diverse. So, you have metros, you have tier 1 cities and towns, and there are many different contexts. Villages, by contrast, are more similar than different kinds of urban contexts. So it's not clear that the same strategy, whether sampling or actual test administration, would make sense for all different urban contexts. And that's just two of many reasons. But if you're interested, Sanjay, we can follow up later, and I can give you some more details on that. Bindu, as to your question on arithmetic, I'm sorry, I did not show the arithmetic tool. I meant to, and I just forgot. The arithmetic tool also has 4 levels, just like the reading tool does. It goes from single-digit number recognition, double-digit number recognition, 2-digit by 2-digit subtraction problem with borrowing, and a 3-digit by 1-digit division problem. That's it. So you're right in that we only include formal numeric tasks here that correspond to the school curriculum. In our earlier survey of 2019 that I referred to in the presentation, where we included younger children in pre-primary age group and early grades of primary, we did some pre-numeracy tasks. So, counting and matching quantity to number and so on. Some of the things that we know come before formal numeracy skills, but those are not part of the design of the ASER tool. The tool is designed to be very short and very quick, and there's only so much you can do with a tool of this kind. But in other surveys and in other studies that ASER Center has conducted, we have used much more complex tools that give much more nuance and unpack a little bit more this idea that, these numeric skills don't come from nowhere. There's a whole series of pre-numeracy skills and early numeracy skills that are required in order to make sure that children develop these numeracy skills as well.
Just a follow-up question, quick one, Rishi, sorry. Since
no problem.
It's so widespread, and we now know that it's really not that important to have these formal arithmetic skills. It's more about numerical thinking, and is just a thought that since it's so widespread and so community-based, that you could possibly change the discourse of how people think of arithmetic if you do change towards a more numerical thinking kind of a survey tool. That's just a thought. Thank you.
So if you look at what Pratham teams do on the ground to help children get to this level of numeric ability, It's probably exactly what you're talking about, Bindu, in terms of these pre-numeric skills that children need to acquire. And that is what Pratham teams are working with state governments and other schools and others to try to have them implement as part of their teaching learning activities, so that we don't face this problem in the future. But the assessment tool, it is now very difficult to change just because we have since we want to be able to compare trends over time, and we have this trajectory from 2005, it is not easy to change the tool, because then comparison with earlier years is not possible.
We'll go with Ritesh sir, followed by Anu ma'am, and then ma'am can take those two questions.
Okay. Thank you, Rishi, and thank you, Sumanji, for a very nice talk. I have two questions, if I have the permission to ask. The first is a very perceptive one, which draws from a comparison of ASER responses over the years, and it showed a certain change in terms of the reading and the arithmetic skills. But what amazed me was a certain response trend which was similar. And I wonder if there is a correlation between the reading and the numeracy skills. If you could speak a little bit about the correlational aspects between reading and numeracy, I think that would be very helpful. And if I can take the other question, I don't know, I'm eating up the space. Yeah, the other question is about, there was a discourse of minimal levels of learning in the 90s with the DPEP and the other programs quite prominent around that time. And now we have the discourse of competencies, which has been throttled through the policy orientations. So now it seems that the idea of assessment that is being engaged with is happening around in frameworks. So is there a contribution of these frameworks in thinking about the ASER kind of orientation, the ASER assessments? Is what I would like. Sorry for the two questions.
Since that was two questions, should I answer those two, or should I wait for Anu's question? Actually, just
ma'am, if you're fine with it, we can take. Yeah,
I'm fine, but I'm not quite sure I understood the very last question, Ritesh. Could you? I'm sorry. You want to know whether ASER assessment has contributed to frameworks, assessment frameworks?
I want to say the other way around, that there are existing discourses with regard to assessment and learning that are in the educational discourse, and they seem to shape the kind of assessment strategies or tools we use. I just wanted to know if there has been an impact of the ideas of MLL or the ideas of competency-based learning onto ASER, or was it neutral to these kind of discourses? Sorry, two questions.
Anu ma'am, we can take your question and then.
Hi, thank you, Suman. I want to know, this is a household survey and there are out-of-school children. How you accounted for the ability of the out-of-school children? How you sampled children who are going to the school and out-of-school children? That is my first question. Then second thing, is it possible to qualitatively reflect on the learning of children from a district? Is there any district that was performing well, or a state that was performing well? Then what was the reason behind that performance? Is there any specific intervention program that was the reason for children doing well? And my third question is, when you compare different years, especially post-COVID and before COVID, how you really study the trend were you able to follow the same set of children pre-COVID and post-COVID? So another thing, whether anything that you can share of the comparison to the NAS survey. So these are some of the questions. And I also was thinking in the lines of Bindu, what she was sharing, when we convert these tests into scientific thinking, mathematic thinking, language ability, whether we will be able to see a different result if we kind of define children's scientific thinking or mathematic thinking or scientific reasoning. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. I hope I will remember all of these questions. Okay, to start with, Ritesh, correlation between reading and numeracy. Yes, I mean, I think the point is, if whether it's a government or an education system or a teacher or a school or a teacher in a classroom is paying attention to what children are learning and not just completing the curriculum, then you're going to see that correlation. So if you're just completing the curriculum, which is how teachers are often assessed, they have to complete the curriculum, then that's what you're doing. And probably children are doing equally badly in both reading and math. If you are paying attention to what children are doing, then you are teaching what children need to learn in order to, you're teaching to the level of the child. And again, you will see a correlation. So to me, I mean, it makes perfect sense that you would see this correlation between reading ability and math ability, because one is paying attention to the child, teaching to the child, and one is teaching to the curriculum and not to the child at all. So I think that that's true that we see that correlation, and not at all surprising, I think, in terms of being able to explain it. Whether what the ASER assessment tool was shaped by assessment frameworks and discourse out there around assessment, I think that much of what led to the design of the ASER survey are the factors that I went over during my presentation. And it was really not so much trying to fit into an academic framework or an assessment framework out there, but trying to find a way to communicate the importance of these things with a range of people. So it was really not looking, it was not aiming to be a national assessment when we started out in 2005. It was aiming to communicate these issues to as wide a range of people as possible. And the issues were the ones that were identified by Pratham in the field via the process that I pointed out. So I think now there is quite a lot of back and forth between some of the assessment frameworks globally. There's a global proficiency framework that, you know, there is some recognition of the work that not just ASER, but, you know, the kind of assessment that ASER does is now being done in many countries, not just in India, 15 countries around the world. So there's some recognition that this model of testing actually has an important contribution in terms of looking at how children learn, what they learn, but that is not how the ASER assessment originated at all. It originated from the field based on Pratham's own needs and interests and what Pratham thought was important to try to communicate broadly to a range of people. And in terms of out-of-school children, yes, it is a household survey. And so we assess all children in the age group in the sampled household, whether they are in school or out of school. The results that we usually report in the ASER report are for enrolled children. And that is because the out-of-school numbers are now so low for the elementary school age group that very often the sample size is just too small to be able to say anything meaningful about out-of-school children. But we do include them, we do assess them. The same assessment is done for all children, whether they're in school, out of school, government school, private school, whatever their education, their schooling status is. reflections on differences in results across states and districts over time. We have seen over the years that when states make a concerted effort to push an agenda of making sure that children acquire these basic skills, you can actually see that reflected in the ASER results of the next year. So this has happened in Punjab. I don't remember exactly which years. I'm sorry, I would have to go back and look. Padho Punjab was a campaign that was run in Punjab for a couple of years, and we could see the impacts of that in the ASER data in the subsequent years. The same thing happened in Madhya Pradesh. This is probably 10 years ago. I don't remember. I'm sorry, I'm terrible with dates. It has happened in Chhattisgarh. It has happened in various locations. When the government makes a concerted effort to make sure that schools and teachers focus on ensuring that every child acquires these basic skills, and they've done that in different ways. Dedicating 2 hours during school to pulling children out of their class groupings and making sure they group by ability level and making sure that they acquire these basic skills. There are different models which states have used. But when it is done statewide for a reasonable length of time, like a year, you can see that outcome in the ASER data. The problem is often that these initiatives are not sustained over many years. So, you can see them for 1 or 2 years, then possibly the initiative has changed. Another person comes, is heading the state government apparatus and comes up with an entirely new plan, and that focus on foundational skills goes away. So it has not been sustained over time in any state. Better or worse? Yes, of course, states and districts are better and worse. It really depends on which indicator we're looking at and which class we're looking at. So if you're looking at reading, some states do better and some states do worse. If you're looking at standard 5 versus standard 8, it really varies depending on which specific indicator. So there is no one state or district that does better on everything. It really just depends on what we're looking at. To your question about whether we follow the same kids pre and post COVID, no. ASER is not a longitudinal study. It's a cross-sectional survey. So it's a new sample every year that is drawn. So the villages are drawn from the census. Then there's a fresh household sample that is drawn in each village. So it is not the same set of kids. But the estimates are comparable because they're large enough to be representative of the district and of the state, and then, of course, nationally. So it's not the same kids, but you still can compare the estimates from one year to the next. And then your last question on comparison with NAS. NAS has a completely different methodology. They test different things. They also test in schools, not in the household. So they're testing different kids. Their computation, the method of doing the assessment, it's a pen paper assessment. They use IRT. So it's a different type of analysis. You cannot actually compare ASER and NAS results at all. We have a whole piece in, I think it was last year's ASER report that compares ASER and NAS. Point by point for sample, assessment tools, administration methods, so on, just to show that these are really apples and oranges and you can't compare the results at all. So that was I think, did I answer all? I think I did answer. Did I leave out anybody's question? Please remind me.
You answered mine, yeah. Ritesh's, I guess, yes.
Thank you.
Looking at the time, I'll just keep the platform open to have one question more. We've almost reached 6, so we'll have one more question, and then we can call a close. Anyone who volunteers for the final question can go ahead.
Hello.
We have Diksha who has raised her hand, and we have Jenny from the class. Can you do 2, ma'am? Can you do 2 as last 2 questions?
I can do as many as you want. You how much time you all have.
We'll take these two. We'll take these two. We'll go with Jenny first, and then I'll move to Diksha.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, Jenny. Yeah.
So my question is, in rural India, most of the parents and children are not aware about education. So, ASER survey, how to basis of finding the act. How to ASER survey basis of finding the act. Those who children are not aware about the education. So, how to ASER survey finding the act.
Sorry, that question was not, I could not quite follow the ASER. Children are not aware of the importance of education. And so
how to act the basis of finding.
How do we generate the findings then?
I think what Jenny wants to say is that there are many parents and people who are not aware in rural area about these surveys. So how do they act and we respond to it?
I love that question. Okay, let me take the other one also.
We can go with Diksha's question. Yeah.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, Diksha.
Yes, you are.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Suman. I'm Diksha from Mumbai campus, student of education. So my question was, since the census data is not updated, like it's from 2011, like how do you deal with the subsequent problems and the gaps in data sets, and like how do you plan on, like you said that there is a new survey in progress on older children and youth, like are you going to use the census data? What data sets are there any alternative data sets available? Like how do you deal with this when you are conducting ASER?
Thank you. And responding first to Jenny's question, I really love that question, Jenny, because I think it goes to the heart of the ASER survey process. When we go to villages and we interact with parents, and as you noted, many parents and many children may not be very familiar with education and may not understand assessment. But the ASER process is designed, I mean, if you saw the photos that I showed you during the PPT, it's very easy to engage even parents who are not literate in a discussion about what does it mean when your child is learning. So even if you just look at the tool, at the reading tool, you can see from the density of text in those 4 levels of tasks, which is the easy one, which is the more difficult one, which is the hardest one in those 4 tasks. So even a parent who has never been to school can kind of figure out, okay, this is the easiest task and my child has been in school for 3 years and should certainly be able to do this. This is a harder task and my child has just started school and maybe will not be able to do this. So there are ways, it is actually a very engaging process. And I think for all of us who do ASER, and probably for every person who has ever done ASER, and that's a lot of people now, I think the richness of it does not come from the data at all. It comes from the experience of engaging with other people around how are our children doing? What can they do? What can they not do? What do they need? Having these discussions. It is the experience of ASER in a village that is far more impactful, I think, for many people than the actual data. So I really hope, Jenny, that someday you will be able to come with us to the field. ASER will be rolling out in your state probably next month. So we'll see and see for yourself how it is that people who have not been into school themselves still manage to engage with this process and learn something about their kids. So it's not just extracting data from rural communities or rural families. It's about actually discussing and talking and learning about our children and what they can do and what they need. Diksha, to your question about census data, well, you know, there is no option. We have to. Sorry?
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Not at all. Thank you, Jenny. To your question, Diksha, about census data, unfortunately, to sample, you have to have a sampling frame, and that sampling frame has to be a census. And the census of India is the only census that is available. So we don't have an option. It is very unfortunate that it has not been conducted since 2011, but we don't have an option. There is no other frame available that has a comprehensive list of all villages in the country. What we find now is that when we sample from that frame and we go to those villages, very often they have become urban, townships or urban, they have been upgraded to some kind of urban classification. And then we have to replace them with a different village. So that is happening a lot just because it's 12 years out of date, the census. But unfortunately, there is no option but to use the latest census that we have.
Yes, thank you, ma'am.
With that, I'll just hold for 5 seconds to see if there's any more questions, but I can then I can go for a close. Thank you. We stayed true to our words. It was really a conversation. It was really a discussion. The last half an hour or so, last 40 minutes or so, we really engaged. Thank you. Thank you to all who posted the questions, asked questions directly to ma'am, and thank you, ma'am, for patiently answering each and every one. And thank you for taking the session. We went across the entire organization, right from its genesis towards the belief of the organization to the way they conduct the survey. We've always dealt with data, but we saw people working behind the stage to give you the data and actually give us a way how to use it. We understood how to read data, and as students, it has, it's given us opportunities to see, where we can work in the areas to, make the data look good in a graph and, reflect a better understanding of it. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much from the Institute. Thank you so much from the school perspective to come and take a session with us on the ASER survey. To Suman ma'am to conclude the talk. Now we can, I think, conclude from your side. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Suman. I would like to introduce Professor Rekha Papu, Professor Ritesh, Professor Bindu Tirumala, who has joined from TISS Mumbai and TISS Hyderabad. So several of our faculty members were here, and it was wonderful to have you as our speaker. Looking forward to the ASER 2023 survey and its results. Rekha, Ritesh, Bindu, if any of you want to add something.
Just to thank you for sharing the entire process. I think it's widely remarked that the signal contribution of ASER has been to popularize the fact that learning can be measured. And I think we learned about that entire process. There are several questions, but it is good to see many of our students engaging with you. So we will look for other opportunities to come back and engage with you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I'm really looking forward to the qualitative research that you are doing. It will be an interesting complementary.
If I could just come in about the qualitative research part, I think you mentioned that every village or a district, the government school is covered. Is that, do you get qualitative data from there? No. Is it like, what is the purpose of that particular engagement? Sorry, Rishi, to come back with a question.
No problem.
Thanks to Anu.
No. The purpose is just to look at what are the school visit is usually done as part of our basic ASER, the big national ASER. So it won't be done this year with the older children. And the purpose is just to look at what are the basic elementary school facilities available, government school facilities available for children. So it is not really looking at teaching learning processes in the classroom at all. It's looking at infrastructure. It's looking at, does the school have drinking water? Does the school have toilets for children, how many teachers are there, very, very basic information about the school. Just to remind you all once again that this is a volunteer-based survey that is conducted, in 2 days in each village. So it is not really possible to go into a lot of depth in the ASER survey. But we have many other research studies that do go into a great deal more detail on some of the in-school factors, including what goes on in the classroom. So, but not as part of the ASER survey.
With that, I think we can go for a close. Any concluding remarks from Suman ma'am, and then we can head for a close.
It's always a pleasure to talk to students and their teachers. I wish we could have had a real conversation and not been at the opposite ends of a set of wires. So maybe someday we'll be able to talk in person. I would strongly encourage you all, if you possibly can, figure out a way to join an ASER survey, even if it's just to see what it's like. You will learn something, I guarantee it. Regardless of how much you think you know your community, you will learn something new. So thank you very much for inviting me. And if anyone has more questions, very happy to follow up on email. Purnima and I will have my email ID, and just let me know and we can take it from there. Thank you all very much indeed for this opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you, Suman. Thank you.